So with the fluorometer, all it should take to wake it up is a touch on the touch screen. And it'll take a little while to warm up. More than a little while, maybe. And once it does, you have all of the commands that you need to have and the proper calibrations set up. So for this part of things, let's take a look at the equipment that you need to have. You need to have the fluorometer, and the fluorometer should be turned on. The fluorometer has a lid that opens and closes. There's no latch on it, just lift it easily, push it down to close it gently. You need to have your samples, obviously, that you've taken out of the refrigerator. They've been sitting in there for 24 hours going through the extraction process. You'll need to have this rack of what look like little test tubes, and I guess that's what you could consider them to be. They're called cuvettes. They're what we're going to place a bit of our sample in and place in the fluorometer for analysis. We've got this box of Kim wipes here, sort of little dust-free tissues that you're going to want to use to wipe any fingerprints off the cuvettes. We've got a whole beaker full of just little plastic eyedroppers here that we'll use to draw the samples out of our sample tubes. And then finally, we have a waste container. It's just an Erlenmeyer flask with a beaker over the top of it to try to help minimize any evaporation. So those are the things that you need to have. Again, the fluorometer, your samples, the rack of cuvettes that you'll use one at a time, Kim wipes for wiping fingerprints off of things, little eyedroppers in the waste container. Okay, so let's go through preparing a sample for measurement in the fluorometer. You want to grab your sample from out of the refrigerator that you have here. Take a look, make sure it's the sample that you need. Make note of the volume of water that was filtered on it. Just open the cap, grab yourself one of these cuvettes and a plastic eyedropper. Grab a good quantity of the extracted sample from your from your filtered sample tube there, and add that to the cuvette. We don't need to worry too terribly much about how much we have in here. If you fill this thing about a third of the way up, that's going to be enough for it to be in the part of the instrument that is going to read it. Take one of the Kim wipes and just make sure that the outside of the tube is dry and you've wiped any fingerprints off of it that may be there. Open the lid of the fluorometer. Place the sample in the holder inside of it. Close the lid carefully, gently, and then go through the measurement process. You have the sample in the tube. Doesn't really matter how much you have in it. You don't need to fill the tube all the way up. As long as you have it about a third of the way up at the top of the tube, there'll be enough sample in there for the instrument to read it. Place the sample in the sample holder. You can see that it's in there, and you can see that the level of liquid in the cuvette is visible above the top of the holder. So the light beam that is passing through it for the fluorometer to make the reading will be fine. There's plenty of sample in that holder, and we can move on to the measurement step. Close the lid gently. Okay, so now we have our sample in the sample holder. The lid is closed. We want to hit this button in the upper right that says Measure Fluorescence. And now you've got to enter a couple of pieces of information. The first piece is the volume of filtered sample water. That should be the volume that you had written on the tube. Remember, that is probably 100 milliliters for every meter of Secchi transparency that you had, but you may have decided to use some different values here. In this particular case, we had 400 ml that we had filtered, but again, this is going to be specific to your sample. Hit OK. And now it's going to ask you what volume of solvent that you used. This is always going to be 10 milliliters. This is the quantity that we added to the tube before we put it in the refrigerator in the previous step. There shouldn't be any reason why you used a different volume from this. It's always going to be 10 ml. And then hit OK. It'll tell you what it's doing. It'll give you a quick look at what your numbers that you put in, the filtered water, 400 ml, the volume of the solvent, 10, so you can check that. It'll give you this F value. Interesting to record that, but don't worry about that. And this is the number that you really want. So this is telling you the amount of chlorophyll that's in the sample in micrograms per liter. So in this case, we have 0.29 micrograms per liter of chlorophyll A in the sample we just tested. You can see here, this device is going to hang on to the last few readings that were there, so you don't necessarily need to write this down. You can kind of scroll back through these values here on the side if you need to. You can see it goes back through the memory quite a ways to some other samples that we've done earlier, so you can scroll up or down. Always a good idea to write each one of these down and not try to remember what you had in terms of a sample number over there. Here on the left-hand side of the screen, write that value down and you'll be good to go.